Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the latest episode of Talk and Stalk, your own holy home for horror. I'm your host, as always, Barry, and I have a special guest with me today, a fellow friend and fellow film buff, somebody that has actually done a few podcasts with me in the past. They're making their long-awaited return, and this is the sadist Samuel.
You're very too kind, sir. Thank you very much once again for having me on board, and thank you everyone for joining us into our dark descent into the infamous, the notorious, even the unseen and obscene.
It's very good to have you back, mate. Obviously, it's been a long time. It's probably been about 6 months, around 5 or 6 months since we last did a podcast together.
You know how it is, slaying demons and battling the forces of evil and dealing with those serial killing stalkers, the supernatural kind as well. It's just normal days for us.
I've got a fiance and 2 little ones, so I know exactly what that's like. Not even the holy water actually works anymore. But it's.
Do you have a young priest and an old priest?
I just use the powers of Christ. The power of Christ seems to compel him. Most of the time, anyway. But so it's good to have you on board again. So obviously you're my corrupted co-host, and today's podcast, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're basically going to be kind of focusing on three directors that really need no introduction to horror fans out there. And we're just going to be kind of talking about what we deem to be their 3 best films. And these 3 directors are going to be John Carpenter, Wes Craven, and George A. Romero. 3 of the biggest names, I think, within the horror genre. If this podcast proves to be successful, I'm sure we're going to do another episode. I know there's certain directors that we want to talk about, the likes of Sam Raimi, maybe David Cronenberg, Lucio Fulci. But for this podcast, we're going to be focusing on these 3 directors. So I think the first director that we're going to talk about is John Carpenter. Widely regarded as being one of the very best in the genre, wouldn't you agree, Samuel?
Oh, there's certainly no question. I mean, his input with the likes of Halloween was an absolute game changer for the industry in itself. So I think it's fair to say that's definitely among our 3 in terms of favourite and his best.
Yeah, Carpenter's a guy that obviously his movie debut was Dark Star back in '74. He's a director that very much kind of is horror, sci-fi. This guy has churned out a lot of classics, certainly a lot of cult classics. And I think the first, we're going to get the ball rolling because there's quite a few films to get through here. Now, in third place for me, this is one of Carpenter's best movies, in my opinion, and that is The Fog, released in early 1980. What's your overall kind of thoughts on The Fog, Samuel?
Well, it was a pleasant surprise. I was one of the misfortunate ones to have watched the remake beforehand. Thankfully, reason came to be, we got around to watching it, and it was just a better film. I think because of I just like this theme that it's a town that's celebrating these so-called great people that helped set this little town. But the problem was they were murderous thieves.
Yeah. It's very much a supernatural horror film, but it certainly has slasher elements to it as well, doesn't it? I love the setting. I love the setting for this film, the coastal town of Antonio Bay, and a great cast. A great cast with, the ever-great Tom Atkins. I love Tom Atkins. I know his favourite film apparently was Night of the Creeps in '86, of all the films that he worked on. But this is one of my favourite film roles of his. Adrian Barbeau, great, who of course was actually married to John Carpenter at the time. Jamie Lee Curtis and Janet Leigh, obviously mother and daughter in this film. I think you'd agree with me as well. This film actually has a great score to it, composed by Carpenter himself.
Well, that's always been one of the sort of the charms with the likes of Carpenter, especially when you there's some concerts that he does do as well of the scores that he does, and the same with what he did with Halloween as well. It's so distinctive. The Altair theory. That's certainly The Fog and Halloween reinforced that, because you could see the fingerprints in the score. It's just you can't necessarily see the fingerprint of the score per se. However, it's very him, and I think that's why I think The Fog is, particularly the score, is one I've revisited a few times.
It is. It's yeah. The remake. Oh man. Oh yeah. The 2005 remake. So you actually watched that before the 80 original.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the consequence of being one of those younger people. Then again, there were other worse remakes that I had to watch before the original. So, So, yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah. As I say, I think this is one of Carpenter's best movies. I love the score. I love the setting. I was actually introduced to this film from quite a young age. I was probably about 7 or 8 when I first watched this. And there's one scene that always stood out to me, and it scared the hell out of me as a kid. And that's the scene where the old lady is actually looking after the young boy, and there's knocks at the door and the fog's coming through. And of course, she gets taken away. You don't actually see her death, but obviously, the undead fishermen, if you will, are actually killing her. And that always left a mark on me, that scene. I love the fact there's little nods to some of other Carpenter's films in here. Tom Atkins actually plays a character called Nick Castle. Nick Castle played Michael Myers in the original Halloween. Good friend of John Carpenter. The Charles Cyphers that played Sheriff Lee Brackett in the original Halloween. His character name is Dan O'Bannon. And of course, Dan O'Bannon wrote Alien. And also went on to direct Return of the Living Dead in '85. Became a film director. So I like all them little kind of like little nods in that. And it's just a film that, as I said, just it manages to be quite creepy. I love the fact of, I know it was a relatively small budget. And it's just a horror film. I believe I read somewhere that Carpenter actually gave the impression that this was actually a bigger movie than what it was. I mean, great cinematography from Dean Cundy as well, who also worked, quite a frequent collaborator with John Carpenter. Would you go so far as to say The Fog is pretty much kind of a horror classic?
I would say so. It's one of those that I think it's overshadowed by some of other Carpenter films, which we'll certainly get on to one in particular quite shortly. Yeah. So I think it is certainly a classic that deserves more recognition, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has a fan base. I mean, I know some people that absolutely love this film. I know some people that actually cite this as their favourite Carpenter film. But not to go too much off topic, there is definitely one other Carpenter film that is massively overlooked. Now, I'll admit, I'm ashamed for admitting this. I've never seen this from start to finish. And it's called Prince of Darkness.
For a moment, I thought you were going to say The Mouth of Madness.
No, but that is definitely underrated as well. I really like In the Mouth of Madness. I think that's a film that doesn't quite get enough attention. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because I love the kind of H.P. Lovecraftian tones in that movie. I love the whole kind of surrealistic nature that film has. Have you seen Prince of Darkness?
It's not one that I missed the opportunity. We had in our society, it was a film that was shown. However, I had other duties that had to be attended to.
Yeah, I mean,
and I'm kicking myself for that.
It stars Donald Pleasance. I've heard it's very much an underrated Carpenter film. And to be honest, actually thinking about it, it might be the only John Carpenter film I've not seen from start to finish. I've never seen it in its entirety, and I need to. But for me, The Fog is definitely one of Carpenter's best. So we're going to move on to, this is kind of second spot for me. And that is 1982's The Thing. Now, would this be your number one pick for Carpenter, or would you kind of second place?
It's a very difficult one, because The Thing was my first experience with John Carpenter. Okay. So, I remember it was at a market, and just seeing that blue DVD cover, just The Thing, and it had such an effect on me. So I think it is my favorite Carpenter, but that doesn't necessarily mean I think it's his best. Let's make that distinction perfectly clear. Yeah,
I think The Thing is great. I think it's one of the best sci-fi horror films ever made. It's very much considered, a sci-fi horror classic. I think this was actually Carpenter's personal favourite. Of all the films he ever made, this is the film that he actually liked the most. And it hit him quite hard, actually, because upon release, this didn't do well. This wasn't
That
a
doesn't.
commercial success, and it didn't even really go down well with most critics at all.
And that doesn't surprise me. I mean, like, E.T. had just came out as well. It was certainly with the time where people wanted nice aliens. I'm not surprised that it's deemed his favorite. I mean, the creative freedom Universal gave him. So you said about The Fog supposedly being a bigger film. It's the same with The Thing. There were some special effects that were supposed to be in there that weren't. However, like The Evil Dead, like A Nightmare on Elm Street, it found itself a completely new life when it was released on video. And technically speaking, The Thing was banned on video in Britain for a little while.
Yeah. I mean, it still holds up remarkably well now, doesn't it?
The practical effects it's the bit with the dog.
Yeah.
Oh my god, there's some parts of it that are just absolutely top notch. I mean, there's the blood testing bit when the revelation happens. Okay, fine. I mean, some of the blood, maybe not so much. However, this is all practical effects. It's nasty. It's it's a stomach churner. And I think it's even more complemented by the brilliant performances with the likes of Kurt Russell and Keith David. I think the big difference with this is that it's very unclear on who would go next. Whereas when you had the 2011 film, it was too predictable on who was going to die, who wasn't. Whereas Carpenter nailed it. Plus the score. You got to tell us about the score.
The score courtesy of Ennio Morricone, may rest in peace, because he actually passed away last year. A great kind of understated score. Simple, yet very effective. To me, this film is kind of pretty much a masterclass in suspense. It's technically speaking a remake of, the 1951 sci-fi film, The Thing from Another World, which also is basically an adaptation of a classic 30s story, Who Goes There? I just love the sense of isolation, claustrophobia, very much kind of an Agatha Christie-esque, who to trust, who's the alien creature. And like you said, the practical effects courtesy of Rob Bottin, who was actually a student of Rick Baker's. I believe he was only 22 years old when he actually come up with the effects for this movie.
That's a hell of an age to do some masterclass stuff like that. But I suppose if your tutor is Rick Baker, it makes sense.
And the previous year, of course, these two guys both did the effects for werewolf movies. Rick Baker for An American Werewolf in London, and Rob Bottin did The Howling. And
which both, again, stand out pretty damn well.
Yep, and American Werewolf in London, of course, got the Oscar. Rick Baker won the Oscar. That was the first year that category had ever actually been introduced. Rick Baker was the first ever winner of that award. So I think the thing, like you said, with the scene, very suspenseful. Who's, the blood testing scene, the alien creature, just that whole kind of sense of paranoia. I think it's a great site. I think it's a great horror movie. I'll be honest, I didn't mind the prequel. I thought the prequel was actually okay. The problem I had with it, and I'm sure you'll probably agree, is the emphasis on CG.
Oh, most certainly. I mean, there was one transformation that I thought, okay, that's actually pretty good. However, the majority of it was very disconnecting. I mean, you had a pretty game performance from Mary Elizabeth Winstead that just wasn't enough to really hold up to it. I mean, it had some yuck in it, but there was just nothing that didn't leave that sense of impression.
Yeah, I think we're both fans of practical. I think most fans are. We love the practical effects, and the 80s was a great decade for that. With the likes of The Thing, An American Werewolf in London, The Blob, The Fly, just so many great practical effects, even in the sci-fi and horror genres. So I personally, I think The Thing is a sci-fi horror classic. So we're going to move on to top spot. I'm pretty certain, I don't think you have to be Sherlock Holmes to work out what's at number one here. One of my all-time favourite slasher movies, the film that really kind of kick-started the slasher genre, if you will, Halloween, 1970.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Ghost of Mars.
Yeah, that might get in my top 20. I don't know, possibly. But go on, Halloween. I'll let you take this away.
Oh, that's not very fair at all. I think it was one of those films that I remember being shown at, I'd seen it like 5 times before we saw it at university, but it was a double bill with Slumber Party Massacre and Halloween.
Yeah.
So we were talking about formula, and I got into some argument about the opening, about, the babysitter had sex and therefore she had to die in Michael Myers' eyes. And the person next to me said, well, how do you know they had sex?
Yeah.
Oh, it's just a shocker.
The light was, the light going off was a bit of a giveaway. The fact that there were clothes actually, Judith Myers is actually sitting there in the nude, stroking, brushing her hair was a bit of a giveaway. It's a movie, isn't it? It's such a simple concept, but the slasher subgenre owes so much to Halloween. Now, we had Black Christmas 4 years prior to it, certainly. Halloween isn't the first film of its kind, but it was very influential, and it was certainly the commercial success that really helped these films to follow.
And even then, Black Christmas, owes some debt towards the likes of Psycho and Peep and Tom, which is something we've touched on plenty of times before.
Yeah.
However, I think the reason why Halloween stood up so well is the efficiency and its simplicity. Michael Myers is pretty much fairly simplistic, and the synopsis is very simple. But again, you've got a game performance from Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yeah. She brings a real sense of vulnerability, perfect in that role. Donald Pleasance, obviously a very established actor, who, I mentioned on a previous podcast, originally didn't want to star in this film. It took some arm twisting. His granddaughter was a big fan of Dark Star, Carpenter's first film, and he came on board, but Christopher Lee turned it down. He said it was the biggest regret of his career. It's just a film that's directed, so simplistic, but it's directed with a lot of finesse. It's all in the execution with Halloween. The score, iconic, one of the greatest scores in the history of horror. Its emphasis, isn't it, is really on suspense, as opposed to, because there's very little blood, isn't there, in this movie, and a very low body count.
Oh yeah, and that's where you could say it takes some inspiration from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You don't have to see everything, and it's enough to have an imagination of what exactly was done. And again, its budget, I think, was around $70,000.
No, it was over three. It was about 320.
Okay,
yeah.
I'm glad to be corrected on that. However, the amount it made at the box office, though, was phenomenal. I think it was like 50-70 million.
It actually made, I believe, just over 65 million, making it the most successful independent film upon release. It was released in October 1978. It didn't actually get to the UK until 79. It was a huge commercial success. And even though Carpenter had directed 2 films prior, this is the film that really made Carpenter. This made him a name to be kind of reckoned with. Halloween, slasher classic, one of my favourite horror movies personally. Let's get on to the next director. Let's talk about Wes Craven, who may rest in peace, passed away in 2015. Really do miss the guy because he has actually directed some of my favourite horror films. Such an academic man as well. Every time I'd see an interview with him, just very articulate, very astute, so let's talk about what's kind of in the third place for you of his 3 best films.
Now, the thing is, for me, it's not necessarily a film I would say I enjoy. However, it's something that needs to be talked about, and that would be his overground directorial debut, The Last House on the Left.
Okay.
Now, it's like I said, we've got to stress that it's not an easy film to watch. However, it's a film that sort of kicked off everything. It's a film that, the likes of Roger Ebert even sort of defended as well. The man who isn't a fan of horror films, who disliked A Clockwork Orange, who disliked Straw Dogs, suddenly, is quite an adamant defender about what this film's trying to do, about the hypocrisies of violence. So, in terms of censorship, it's got an amazing history. The film was prosecuted for obscenity, I think, 4 times in this country, and it was not passed uncensored until 2008. So, in fact, the film critic Mark Kermode, when it was originally rejected, actually participated in the appeal for it. So, there are parts. it's quite an influential film as well. Did you ever watch the Untold Story?
I haven't. No, I haven't seen that. I've seen the original. You know, I've seen the film. I've seen the film a few times. It's not really. It's not a film that I'm particularly that much of a fan of. But I agree, it's a film that did play an important part in kind of exploitation cinema, if you will. And he collaborated, didn't he, with Sean Cunningham, that actually went on to direct Friday the 13th.
So yeah, that's it's a starting point, and it's certainly something stretches out. I mean, like even nods towards The Last House on the Left are certainly extended to some of Craven's most mainstream works. I mean, we've spoken about this before.
Yeah.
Freddy Krueger's name is very much inspired by the character of Krug, played by David Hess.
Yeah. A very despicable human being, from what I recall.
Oh, certainly. I mean, the family certainly had elements of the Manson family. I think the documentary-esque approach, though, I think is brilliant, but it certainly didn't help with its griminess. But that's the point. It's supposed to be shocking. It's supposed to be upsetting.
Yeah.
But imagine being in the 1980s. You've just got your hands on a copy of this film, and it's absolutely churned. You know, you're talking about fourth grade video.
Yeah.
It's already a nasty film. So to watch that, the effect that must have had on people.
Yeah. The film definitely, I mean, it's been a few years since I've seen it. The film definitely has a very raw, visceral quality to it. And, you know, I commend them. They achieved what they set out to do. Wes Craven achieved it for a film to actually, you know, hit a nerve with people. Now, just not to get off topic or anything, what did you think to the 2009 remake?
It lost the plot. I honestly thought, like, the way it ended with the son of Krug, I just went, it's kind of missed the point. However, I guess we gotta tolerate it because, well, it just shows that it's entered popular culture.
Yeah. I thought, to be honest, right, I thought as remakes go, I've certainly seen a lot worse. I've seen better, but I've certainly seen a lot worse. I still, because there's a certain aspect. There's obviously a certain thing, as you know, that I really struggle to stomach in film, and that is rape. And in both films, well, the 2009 remake mainly is, I can't watch that. I can't watch that kind of stuff. It just seemed to go on forever and that. But no, I agree with you. Last House, while I'm not a fan, it's an important film. It is a pretty important film for the genre.
I think the one final note is that it's very bizarre on the way the cops are depicted. It's very, if it's not Lauren Hardy, then it's Abbott Costello.
Yeah.
It's so hammy, and so I know what it's trying to point out. It's the incompetence of the law, if you will. However, it just doesn't seem to fit. And I think that juxtaposition of grisly nastiness with absurdist comedy certainly did inspire things like. As I said, the Untold Story, Hong Kong Category 3 film, but we'll say that for a different time. So it shouldn't work, but Wes Craven did.
Yeah.
But then again, we shouldn't be surprised by that.
No, it put his name on the map, well, in the third spot for me is Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Now, this is divisive. There's going to be people that hate me, that want to crucify me for saying this. I really like Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I thought it was a great slice of postmodern horror. I like the fact they were doing something entirely new for that franchise, that it kind of deconstructs the genre. Maybe it was too meta for some people, and it's not really a sequel per se, because obviously, this film addresses the fact that the Nightmare films aren't real, etc. But I love this movie. I love just for how clever and inventive it is. And it came out a couple of years before Scream. Wes Craven was doing postmodern horror a couple of years before, the release of Scream. And, it gave us a dark Freddy Krueger. And I just love the parallels it has to the original movie as well. Getting to see John Saxon playing John Saxon. All of these actors, Robert Englund, Wes Craven, playing themselves. What's your kind of overall thoughts on New Nightmare?
Oh, it's certainly it's certainly subjected to the individual. I certainly think in terms of, I guess, sequels or sort of something that sort of picks apart the mythos of Freddy Krueger, I think it does a pretty good job. I know Lucio Fulci claimed that it stole his idea for Cat in the Brain, but that's again a completely different story. The one bit was the interview with Wes Craven. Now that the films have ended, the genie's out of the bottle. It's just like, no, he's absolutely right. It's Krueger has entered into something else.
Yeah,
like worse than just a movie, a villain, an icon.
Yeah,
that's something
I love it when
else.
Freddy comes back and his first line to Nancy is "Miss me." I just love that. And when he's, "Hey Dylan, ever play Skin the Cat?" I love that the fact there's nothing really jokey about Freddy in this film. It's a darker, serious, and yeah, I think it's underappreciated. I think it's divisive. The people that like this film typically really like it, and the people that really don't. It's the most divisive film in that whole Nightmare franchise, I think. So we're going to get into the second film now, anyway. This was tough. There were two films here, and I think everyone knows what they're going to be. I'm going to put Scream in second spot. What can I say? I mean, it reinvented and revived the slasher genre for the 90s. It's a film that pays homage, it celebrates the genre, whilst playing on the conventions that we've all, come to know and love. It's clever, great screenplay by Kevin Williamson, great direction by Wes Craven, great casting, characters, and of course a Ghostface costume, which of course has become iconic. I think you love, I mean, it's safe to say you love Scream as well, don't you?
I think, considering of the enthusiasm that we both have whenever we have previously talked about the Scream films in our podcast, I think there's certainly a film that has a place in both of our hearts. And that's where it is my favourite Wes Craven film. However, like you, it's difficult to say whether or not it is his best. I mean, there's so many quotable parts, and there's something that disturbingly resonates with both of us. I mean, the amount of times we've quoted it, and the amount of times it's just this warped warmth that I get from the film.
Yeah, it's a film that, at the end of the day, it's not an outright comedy. It's a movie that certainly has humour, but it knows to be serious when it needs to be. And, like you said, the quotable lines. I mean, movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative. It's a Scream, baby. I'll be right back. Yeah.
Number 3, never, ever at any point say, "I'll be right back," because you won't be back. I'm getting another beer. You want one?
I'll be right back. Yeah, I love it's self-referential, certainly. Obviously, it makes a lot of references, and it's really for the horror fans, the die-hard slasher fans out there, that really kind of pick up on these. A little cameo from Linda Blair, from The Exorcist, making a cameo. Wes Craven himself, wearing a striped jersey and hat, little nod to his own creation, Freddy Krueger. I absolutely love Scream. And, the twist at the end being two killers. Spoiler alert, I'm going to assume everyone listening has seen it. It was completely unexpected, actually, when I first saw it. Because I know the original title was going to be Scary Movie as well, wasn't it?
Which was ended up being stolen by that parody of a parody, which again I can't get my head around that.
No.
About with the Scary Movie, not Scream.
It's a film that, if anyone's interested in that, we have done a Scream podcast, probably going back about 8 months, 7 or 8 months now. It's on the channel to listen to, where we do really kind of dissect that film. So number 1, of course, is, I think, Wes Craven's first commercial success, his first big movie, A Nightmare on Elm Street. The film that kind of put New Line Cinema on the map. It was their first success that they had. It gave birth to the icon that is Freddy Krueger. I'll let you take it away, mate. Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, blimey, okay. Leave it to me, I guess. So, I think the slasher genre, I think we spoke about this before, slasher genre had sort of followed certain rules. So, but with the exception of Jason Voorhees and possibly Michael Myers, Freddy's, he's a supernatural serial killer. So certainly breaks it with that. It's certainly more, as you said, with The New Nightmare, it's going back to the darkly sort of sadistic Fred Krueger, and it does play the idea that the sins of the parent fall upon their children.
Yeah.
And that's quite an uncomfortable idea to go for. That your fate is sealed because of what your parents did. That's a very uncomfortable concept.
Yeah. It's a scary concept, isn't it? Someone trying to kill you in your dreams. If you die in your dream, you die in the real world. The whole concept of it is scary. And it's like you said, Freddy Krueger is actually quite scary in this movie. There's little goofy moments here and there, but it's not to the point of parody. He's not a Looney Tunes character like he became in Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare, which I really don't like. I get it's fun. I understand it. People like it for the fun it is. It just, by that point, I was really missing the scare factor, like the original had. This is God, and just so many great moments. Glenn's death, Johnny Depp's death on the bed.
Again, the practicality of that being done as well is very unnerving. I believe it's actually not huge. I think Watch Mojo did top 10 most disturbing cinematic deaths,
okay. And
I believe it was Glenn's fate that was amongst the top 5. I'm happy for someone to fact check me on that one.
Wow, yeah, it's definitely a memorable. It scared me. I was about 5 or 6 when I watched Nightmare on Elm Street, and that scene always stayed with me. Tina's death as well. Obviously, the first victim in the movie is pretty barbaric. One particular scene that I love in the film, it's just literally one scene, is her in the bath, Nancy in the bath, and Freddy's hands coming out.
That's replicated. That scene has been replicated so many times. Again, though, it's harrowing because to fall asleep is one thing. Yeah. In a bath, though, like the concept of just drowning is just that's something I struggle with.
I believe that Wes Craven had actually, again, I'm ashamed for admitting this because this is one of the few Wes Craven films I'm yet to see. There's a movie he directed called Deadly Blessing, which was notable for starring Sharon Stone, and there's actually a scene in it in which he's in the bath, and I believe there's a snake in the bath, and Wes Craven almost recycled it for Nightmare on Elm Street. It's a very similar scene. But I absolutely love that moment.
I have to admit, I can't say that I have seen that either, so I think we both need to do our homework on that one. One thing I do like is, you'll be surprised at how much a Nightmare, the last house on the left, sort of has its tendrils in A Nightmare on Elm Street, particularly when it comes to home defense.
Yeah,
like the likes of the Hills of Eyes, and of course even in the last house, the idea of improvised house defenses, of the exploding light bulb, and saying all these booby traps in the house as well. That's certainly an ongoing theme. Of this is your house, this is your fort, you will defend it.
Yeah, I know. Kind of like Home Alone before Home Alone, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I love the music actually, because I love the score in Nightmare on Elm Street, and of course 1, 2, Freddy's cut. Just iconic, isn't it, among horror fans. But yeah, Nancy Heather Langenkamp, a great kind of final girl. The best since Laurie Strode, in my opinion. But yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street, horror classic. It injected originality into the slasher genre. I love that whole kind of surrealistic supernatural edge it has. I love that kind of like, are they awake or are they asleep? Do you know what I mean? It just distorting reality.
Certainly, and I think that's what made the big difference between the likes of Jason and Myers, as we spoke beforehand, and but it's well executed. That's the key thing, because it could have been clumsily done. Yeah,
that's right. And Wes Craven's best film in my opinion. So we're going to get on to the final director now, and that is going to be, may he rest in peace, George A. Romero, the guy that is responsible for essentially creating the zombie genre that we know. I actually met him at Comic-Con a few years back. I believe we went together, didn't we, at that Comic-Con, didn't we?
No, the one we went to was to see Nick Castle and Lance Henriksen.
Oh, okay. So yeah,
believe me, I would if I was going to see George Romero. Believe me, you'd know.
Okay, I can't quite remember who I went with, but yeah, I got his autograph. He signed my copy of a DVD on a film that is going to be on this list. And he passed away a little while ago. And yeah, again, one of the big names in the horror genre. The whole kind of zombie genre owes a lot to him. So I'm going to talk about the third film on the list, and in third place for me is Creepshow, released in 1982, which is very much kind of a love letter, a homage to the classic EC horror comics of the 1950s, of which I'm a big fan of. I love the Tales from the Crypt comics, Haunt of Fear, Vault of Horror. George A. Romero, along with many other people in the horror genre, grew up reading these comics. Stephen King himself as well, who actually, this was a collaboration with him and Stephen King. Stephen King wrote it, he directed. It's one of the best anthology films out there. In my opinion, it's just a film that has a lot of fun with the 5 stories it has. I like the little wraparound with, again, Tom Atkins. But I know it's been a long time for you, hasn't it, since you've seen Creepshow?
It was one of those, as soon as I discovered it, I was very eager to get my hands on it, but not just a standard DVD, sort of, one of those collector's items, if you will. So its visual aesthetics, I think, are absolutely beautiful. Again, it's the mixture of the likes of the practical effects, as well as some of the comic book look as well. I just thought it was so beautiful to look at, and I think that in itself, King and Romero, what a collaboration.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, definitely. Very comic book aesthetics and, some great practical effects, courtesy of old Tom Savini, who I don't think needs any introduction among horror fans. Creepshow, it had a sequel, Creepshow 2, which was quite good, actually. The third one, we're not even going to talk about that. It's not worth wasting oxygen on. Creepshow 2 was quite a good sequel, 3 segments instead of 5. You got a great cast in there. I mean, let's not forget Ed Harris was in the first segment in this film. Ed Harris doing a cheesy little dance in the movie as well. I mean, it's worth watching just for that.
I remember that.
Adrienne Barbeau again, who I absolutely love. Do you know what? Adrienne Barbeau, this is quite notable. I don't know how many actors can say this. She's worked with 3 big horror directors. She has worked with Craven, Romero, and Carpenter. How many other actors out there could say that?
Do you know what? I can't really. Nothing. No one in particular is really springing to mind.
Because she was in Swamp Thing, 1982, same year as Creepshow. In fact, Wes Craven movie. My favourite segment in the film. I think all 5. I mean, Leslie Nielsen's in the film as well. Before he was doing Naked Gun, I like all 5 segments. But my favourite one is the crate with the kind of Arctic monkey. That Adrienne Barbeau and I think it was Hal Holbrook. He obviously tries to get rid of his wife by using the Arctic monkey in that. But it's just a really fun anthology film,
which I think is refreshing. I think when you consider the likes of all the other films that he's done beforehand that Romero did, they're not exactly what you'd say more. It's not that Creepshow's light-hearted. It's just certainly it's got what Evil Dead is defined for. You have fun while you're being scared, and it's scary to have fun.
Yeah, exactly. And as I say, it was very much kind of a love letter to them EC horror comics of the 50s. Very much a tribute. And second spot for me. I'm going to let you take this one away. And that is 1978's Dawn of the Dead. Oh, yeah.
So, as I say, because I know there's some people who have had huge disputes between what would make top and second. So, so after, I think, a decade of unsuccessful films with the likes of The Crazies, Martin, as well as Season of the Witch, we finally got ourselves the sequel, which, it's set in the same universe, but it doesn't have the same characters as from Night. However, it's a zombie film with a brain inside of its head. In fact, I mean, again, to quote the film critic Roger Ebert, who gave a full 4 stars, said it's one of the greatest horror films ever made. No one ever said art had to be in good taste. And he's absolutely right. There are some genuine unpleasantries in this film, which, again, top-notch special effects by Savini, who himself made a nice little cameo as a biker gang.
Yeah. He was one of the biker gang. I love the setting for the film. It's obviously, Night of the Living Dead is what started the entire zombie genre, pretty much as we know it. Dawn of the Dead is clearly a bigger movie, more scope. It's a long film as well, isn't it? It's well over 2 hours.
that depends on which version you're talking about,
Okay.
because you have the Argento cut as well, which I believe is stretching to 2 hours and 10 minutes. Again, I'm happy to be corrected on that. There's at least three different versions of it. I think there's like the Cannes version, the Romero version, and then the Argento version.
Yeah, I think. See, the thing is, right? I don't know how many versions I've seen. I really don't. I used to have it on DVD, and I think it was about 2 hours 10. So it could actually be the Argento cut that I saw. But it's certainly an iconic horror movie. It's certainly very influential. As I said, a bigger movie. It makes a lot of commentary as well. I think about consumerism and so forth. There's a lot of commentary in the film, the kind of underlying. And like you said, great practical effects, courtesy of Tom Savini and that. And I'll admit, I liked the 2004 remake.
Well, I think we both have a few things to certainly say on that film in a future podcast. So, on a simple note, as remakes go, it's better than it deserved to be. So, again, it doesn't have the brain that Romero's film have. But we'll certainly save that for a different time.
Yeah. I mean, it was Zack Snyder's directorial debut, wasn't it? The very first film he directed. And I almost forgot until recently that... his name's escaping me. James Gunn actually wrote the screenplay for it.
Actually, whenever we do talk about that, I've got a fact to point out about James Gunn, which will make perfect sense.
Okay, cool. Well, I look forward to... So, yeah, people listening, there is going to be a 2004 Dawn of the Dead podcast. We will be doing that soon. So, yeah, we'll dissect that film. But, yeah, Dawn of the Dead 78. It's a classic. It's not my all-time favourite zombie film, but it isn't far off. And, it's one of the movies as well that I feel... I really like the kind of claustrophobic aspect. Now, it's not obviously as claustrophobic as Night of the Living Dead because it's a much larger setting and all this. But, defenseless, they're in this mall and, the world is basically in a state of ruin now. And, just the whole idea for the film. And I really didn't realise that Roger Ebert gave it such a lightning review.
Yeah, it's surprising when you consider his general history with horror hasn't exactly been overly enthusiastic. In fact, he gave a slightly more positive review than he did for Night of the Living Dead.
Oh, okay. Wow.
I believe he gave it 3.5 stars out of 4 for Night. But again, though, I think slightly different time, though. However, you know what? I mean, he was certainly very, zealous and quite enthusiastic about both the films, so I thought that's good.
Yeah, definitely. It's a sequel that, I mean, obviously it's the second part in what was dubbed the Dead trilogy, followed by Day of the Dead, which didn't quite get into my top 3. It wasn't far off. Day of the Dead really wasn't far off. That would have been in 4th place.
Funny enough, it wouldn't be for me. It'd have to be Martin.
Oh, okay, Martin. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen that. I need to rewatch that.
As a vampire film, I'll tell you what. Again, it's so much better than people make it out to be. I'm still waiting for a restoration copy to come out from, say, Arrow Video. I think they already did one. Again, I'm happy to be corrected on that.
Okay. So I think we know, just to kind of reiterate, just to confirm in that. So is Dawn of the Dead your number 1 or number 2 for Romero?
It's my favorite. Again, I think, as we've spoken about previously with Carpenter and Craven, it's my favorite. I wouldn't necessarily say it's his best. Okay.
So, right, well, my number 1 is, I'm sure everyone that knows me knows that I love this movie, Night of the Living Dead. The film that essentially gave birth to the zombie genre as we know it. George Romero kind of, setting the template, if you will, building up the conventions in this one movie. Shooting them in the head, if you're bitten, you become a zombie. All of the conventions were kind of set in place in this film. I love the black and white, low-budget, grainy look. The black and white just adding to the film's atmosphere and creepiness, in my opinion. It's almost like it's a very kind of extended Twilight Zone episode. And I saw this film as a kid. I was probably 7, 8 years old. It terrified me. I watched this really late at night, and I remember just being scared. What's your thoughts on Night of the Living Dead?
Well, I think I did watch it a little bit later than when you did. However, I was surprised by it, I think, on multiple fronts, especially with the way it ends. I mean, I remember Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue. George Romero's being interviewed about Night of the Living Dead, and that it's a film that encapsulates the time that it was made, the anger and the disappointment of the time.
Yeah.
Peace and love didn't win anything. In fact, things were getting worse. So this film was very much a response to the cultural conundrum that was kicking off at the time. And you can certainly think when you put it in that context, it makes perfect sense. And it is, I think you could class it as a countercultural film when you consider the lead actor himself, who is very good, I will say, and considering that he himself was black, was a bit of a game changer. And I think his character was certainly quite inspiring to a lot of people. I want to say even Barack Obama has cited him.
Oh, really? Okay, wow. I didn't know that, but the ending is bleak. It certainly has an ending you're not going to forget. Obviously, spoiler alert, he actually survives the night only to get killed, which I'm sure probably made some commentary at the time. I don't know, but we're not going to go into that. We're not going to go into politics and all that. I mean, a very influential film, hugely influential. I think the whole zombie genre owes so much to Night of the Living Dead.
I don't even think just zombies as well. The author Kim Newman actually wrote a book called Nightmare Cinema, and he actually argues that a lot of the horror that we now know and love all stems from the likes of Night of the Living Dead, with its claustrophobia, with its subversion of expectations, the surrealism, as well as just dabbing into the horrors of the time as well. So that's certainly is a strong argument you could make for it. Very, very influential. I don't think we could ever state that.
Yeah, it's very much a cult classic, isn't it? I know that Tom Savini was actually supposed to do the practical effects, but he actually got sent to Vietnam, but obviously came back for, was able to do Dawn of the Dead. And it just has one of the most iconic lines in the history of horror: "They're coming to get you, Barbara."
Oh, the amount of times I've quoted that to people is just hysterical. Especially when you've got colleagues who are actually called Barbara. I think shocking, especially when they know where the line comes from as well.
Yeah, I really like the line as well, which obviously pays great horror comedy. Shaun of the Dead, "We're coming to get you, Barbara."
Which again, that is one of the shining examples of how influential. Did we speak about this, of how Romero was so impressed by what Edgar Wright did, that he offered roles to Peg and Wright in Land of the Dead? Yeah, we did.
They make cameos as zombies, don't they? Yeah. We're Night of the Living Dead, and I'm not ashamed to admit this either. I like the remake. Completely unnecessary. Certainly doesn't really need to be remade. But the remake, released in 1990, directed by Tom Savini himself, I like it. I actually like it. I think it's a remake that doesn't really get talked about quite enough. Have you seen the remake?
I did, but it was a while back. It's one of those remakes where I don't feel like there's any negative emotion towards it, but there isn't anything I can feel that's overly positive. I mean, I think it's in capable hands with the likes of Tom Savini, so there isn't really much of a positive or negative response for that. Weirdly enough, there's actually a nod to Savini's Night of the Living Dead in Tropic Thunder.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Danny McBride's character is, I believe he's wearing a vest, which even points out the title and the year it was made as well.
Oh, right. Oh, cool. I haven't seen that film in a long time. Tropic Thunder's really good, though, from what I remember of it.
Yeah, we'll certainly have to save that for another time, though. I think, though, Criterion. Oh, did you ever get your hands on the Criterion edition of Night of the Living Dead?
It's the version I have. Yeah.
Yeah, it is absolutely superb. That is the treatment that the film deserves.
Yeah, and you've just reminded me, I'm not going to go into it, I'll save this for another podcast. There is another black and white horror film from the 60s that I bought a few months ago on Blu-ray called Carnival of Souls.
Oh, superb.
And very much a cult classic, released in 62. I love it because that movie is it has a definite Twilight Zone aesthetic to it. I really do like Carnival of Souls, and yeah, again, a fantastic restoration. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it now. For the listings and that. So yeah, Night of the Living Dead's my number one. So Dawn of the Dead's your number one.
Well, I mean, yeah. In this case, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. I think that's pretty much it. So what we're probably going to do is we're going to wrap this up, and we're going to look to do another podcast and focus on 3 other directors. We'll have a discussion as to who's going to be showcased, but I do believe we're kind of angling towards the likes of Lucio Fulci, possibly Cronenberg, and maybe Toby Hooper. We'll see. And of course, yeah, Sam Raimi's another possible candidate there as well. So, but yeah, thanks a lot for everyone that listened. We'll be back again soon to haunt you and torment you. So thanks for listening. If you've liked what you've heard, please feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Talk and Stalk, and we'll be back again soon.
Thank you all very much, and always double check your beds.
And don't forget, we're going to be back for the sequel, because as Stu Mack has said, these days...
Let's face it, babies, these days, you gotta have a sequel.
Okay. All right, thanks a lot for everyone for listening. Take care.